I'll never forget the night I stayed at that hotel. It wasn't even a planned stop. It was just somewhere I stumbled upon during a long drive. I'd been on the road for hours, and it was well past midnight when I saw the neon sign. Vacancy. It felt like a lifeline. I needed rest, and the place didn't look too sketchy. The building was older, definitely a little worn down, but it wasn't falling apart either. The lobby was dimly lit with a few dusty chairs and an ancient-looking desk. A man behind the counter greeted me with a tired smile, almost like he had been waiting for me. I didn't think much of it. He handed me the key to room 207, and I made my way upstairs. The hallway was eerily quiet. I passed a few doors, all with their numbers faintly peeling away. The air felt thick, like there was something about this place that didn't sit right with me, but fatigue was setting in, so I shrugged it off. When I got to room 207, the door creaked as I pushed it open. The room was small, with a bed covered in an old, lumpy comforter. There was a window that faced a brick wall, no view to speak of. But I didn't care. I just needed sleep. I locked the door, pulled the blinds, and sat on the bed, unpacking my things. That's when I noticed something strange. There was a smell in the room, not musty or stale, but something metallic, almost like blood, but I couldn't pinpoint it. I figured maybe it was just old pipes or something, but as I sat there, I couldn't shake the feeling that I wasn't alone. I looked around, trying to spot any signs that someone else had been there recently. Nothing. No signs of disturbance, no odd marks on the walls, but I still couldn't shake the unease. I decided to turn on the TV, hoping some noise would calm my nerves. As I flicked through the channels, I paused on one that was just static. I thought about changing it, but then something caught my eye. In the static, there was a figure. It wasn't clear, not at first, but as I stared, I saw it. A pale face, almost translucent, floating in the screen. I felt my heart race. The longer I looked, the clearer it became. The face had no eyes, just dark, hollow sockets, and its mouth. It was smiling, or at least, that's what it looked like. I jumped up, turning the TV off in a panic. My hands were shaking, but I told myself I was just tired, that I was imagining things. I needed to calm down, but I couldn't shake the feeling that something was terribly wrong. I went into the bathroom to wash my face, hoping the cool water would help. As I leaned over the sink, I glanced at the mirror, and there it was, a figure standing behind me, barely visible, but unmistakable. I spun around, but the bathroom was empty. My pulse was racing, and my breath quickened. I forced myself to leave the bathroom and sit back on the bed, trying to collect myself. That's when I heard it, soft tapping. At first it was faint, almost inaudible, but as it grew louder, I realized it was coming from the closet. I didn't want to open it, but I couldn't just sit there, listening to it. Slowly I got up and approached the closet, my heart hammering in my chest. I hesitated for a moment, then yanked the door open. Empty. Nothing but old coats and a few boxes stacked in the corner. I stood there for a second, feeling foolish. But as I was about to close the door, something caught my eye. An old photograph lying underneath one of the boxes. I picked it up. It was faded, a black and white photo of a woman with a pale face and hollow eyes. It was the same face from the TV. I froze. My mind was racing, trying to make sense of what was happening. And then I heard the tapping again. It was louder now, but this time it was coming from behind me. I turned around slowly, and there she was, standing in the corner of the room, just like the figure in the photo. Her face was so pale, it almost blended into the wall. Her eyes were empty, hollow, and her mouth, it stretched wide into an unnatural grin. I ran. I didn't even bother packing my things. I just grabbed my keys and bolted out of that room. I didn't stop running until I was in my car, driving away, my hands trembling on the steering wheel. I never went back to that hotel, and I don't think I ever will. But I know one thing for sure. That woman, or whatever it was, is still there, waiting for the next person who checks into room 207. I'm still not sure whether what happened that night was a nightmare or something much worse. It's been 2 years, and I can't forget a single detail. I just can't explain it. I was on a solo road trip, driving through a quiet, desolate stretch of highway. It had been a long day of driving, and I was exhausted. Around midnight, I started scanning for a place to rest. That's when I saw the lights of a small, off-the-beaten-path hotel. The neon sign flickered above the entrance, reading Pine Ridge Inn. It looked a little run down, but I didn't mind. I wasn't picky at that point. I pulled into the parking lot, which was strangely empty. There was one car parked near the entrance, but other than that, it seemed like I was the only guest. I shrugged it off, tired and ready to get some sleep. The building was old, but I figured it would do for a night. I walked into the lobby. The receptionist was an older woman, maybe in her late 60s. She had grey, stringy hair, and her face looked like it hadn't seen daylight in years. Her eyes were unnervingly pale, almost as if she had no pupils. She didn't say much, just handed me a key with the number 7 written on it in faded marker. When I asked if there were any restaurants nearby, she just shook her head slowly and said, "No, best you stay in tonight." That was odd, but I didn't think much of it at the time. I thanked her and made my way to the room. Room 7. The second I opened the door, the stale, musty smell hit me. The air felt thick, like the room had been sealed for years. The bed was covered in a faded floral comforter that looked like it belonged in a nursing home. The walls were cracked, and the carpet was stained with who knows what. But again, I was too tired to care. I locked the door behind me, dropped my bags, and went straight to bed. I tried to sleep, but the silence was suffocating. I've never been the type to get creeped out by quiet, but this was different. It felt oppressive, like the silence was watching me. And then, around 3 a.m., I heard it. A soft knocking. I froze, my heart thudding in my chest. I lay perfectly still, listening. Knock, knock, knock. 3 slow, deliberate raps at the door. I got up, cautiously walked to the door, and peered through the peephole. Nothing. No one was standing outside. I opened the door a crack, scanning the empty hallway, but it was just as quiet as before. I checked the door again to make sure it was locked. Everything seemed fine. My mind was racing, but I convinced myself it was just my tired brain playing tricks on me. I returned to bed, but sleep wouldn't come. The silence was unbearable. The feeling of being watched returned, stronger than before. And then it happened again. The knocking. This time I could swear it was coming from inside the room. I spun around, but the room was empty, as it had been when I entered. The knocking was louder now, coming from beneath the bed. I didn't want to look, but something told me I had to. Slowly, I dropped to my knees and peered under the bed. There was nothing there, but just as I was about to stand up, I heard a soft voice, a whisper, almost imperceptible. "Leave." I whipped around, but there was no one there. I was alone. My pulse was racing. Panic started to rise in my throat as I realized something wasn't right. I grabbed my things, prepared to leave, but when I reached for the door handle, it wouldn't budge. The lock wouldn't unlock. Frantically, I twisted it again and again. That's when I heard it, a heavy, dragging sound coming from behind me. I spun around, and my blood ran cold. There, in the corner of the room, was the figure of a man. His back was to me, but I could see him hunched over, dragging something across the floor, something that made a sickening scraping sound. I couldn't breathe. My mind was screaming at me to move, to get out, but my legs wouldn't work. I stood frozen, watching the man slowly turn his head, revealing his face. It was pale, like the receptionist's, but twisted in a grotesque, unnatural way. His eyes were empty voids, black as night. "You shouldn't be here," he muttered, his voice low and raspy. Then, without warning, he lunged at me. I managed to force the door open, and I ran out of that room faster than I've ever run in my life. I don't remember how I got out of the building or how I made it to my car. All I know is that I drove away without looking back. I never went back to that place, and I never will. I don't know if what I experienced was real, or if it was some kind of sleep deprivation-induced hallucination. But one thing I know for sure, I will never, ever stay at a hotel like that again. I still can't get over what happened to me last year. I've tried to block it out of my mind, but some things just won't let you forget. I don't know if it was a prank, a coincidence, or something else, but I'm convinced that there was something wrong with that hotel. It started when I booked a last-minute room for a work trip. The company was hosting a seminar in a small town I'd never been to before. The hotel was called the Old Hollow Inn, and to be honest, it didn't look like much from the outside. Kind of run down, with peeling paint and a faded sign that looked like it hadn't been updated in decades. I should have thought twice, but I didn't have the time. I checked in late that night, around 11 p.m. The front desk was staffed by an older woman who didn't say much. Her expression was neutral, but her eyes seemed vacant almost. She handed me the key to room 307 with a stiff smile and a soft, "Enjoy your stay." The room was exactly what you'd expect from a cheap hotel. The carpet was worn. The bedspread had stains that looked like they hadn't been cleaned in ages, and the air smelled musty. It didn't bother me at first, though. I was just tired, and the last thing I wanted was to deal with complaints. I threw my stuff down on the bed and collapsed, setting an alarm for the morning. Around 2:30 a.m., I woke up to a faint knocking at the door. At first, I thought I had imagined it, but it came again, slow, deliberate. Knock, knock, knock. I lay there frozen, my heart pounding. There was no way anyone should be out in the hallway at this hour. I got up cautiously and peered through the peephole. Nothing. The hallway was dark and empty, but the knocking persisted. My gut twisted in that way it does when you know something's wrong. I hesitated for a moment, but I finally opened the door. No one was there. Just an empty hallway, the low hum of an old air vent. I stepped into the corridor to check, but as I did, I heard the faintest whisper. It was hard to make out at first, but it was coming from the direction of the stairs. I walked toward it, my steps echoing in the silence. The whisper grew clearer, but it didn't sound like a person. It was more like a low, unintelligible murmur, almost like a chant. I turned the corner toward the staircase, and that's when I saw it. At the top of the stairs was a figure, standing still in the dark. A tall man, dressed in what looked like a tattered suit, his face obscured by shadow. My heart skipped a beat. The man didn't move. He just stood there staring at me. I wanted to turn and run back to my room, but something rooted me in place. The air felt thick, almost suffocating. I could hear the whispering more clearly now, though I still couldn't understand the words. It was like the man was somehow part of the sound. The next thing I remember was stumbling backward into my room, slamming the door shut behind me. I bolted the lock and backed away, my breath coming in sharp gasps. I tried to call the front desk, but the phone in the room was dead, no dial tone. I couldn't leave. Something about that hallway, about the air in this hotel, felt wrong. I didn't sleep the rest of the night, too terrified to even blink, listening to the silence around me. When morning finally came, I wasted no time checking out. I barely looked back as I handed the key to the same woman at the front desk. She didn't say a word, just gave me that same empty look. I didn't think about the hotel again for months, until recently. I was talking to a colleague who happened to mention a hotel called the Old Hollow Inn. I felt a chill run through me. I told him about my experience, and that's when he said something I'll never forget. "You were there on the night of the anniversary, weren't you?" I stared at him, confused. "Every year, someone who stays there goes missing," he said, lowering his voice. "It's always on the night of the anniversary. People say the hotel is haunted. And the man you saw, the one on the stairs, he's been seen there for decades. I don't know what to believe. I've never gone back to that town, and I've never seen another hotel like it. But there's something about that place, something that I can't shake. Even now, I still hear that whisper sometimes, soft, almost like a distant chant. And sometimes, late at night, when I'm alone, I swear I can hear knocking on my door.